Check, 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 check. There we go. Let's make sure we have sound over here. Hello. Cool. All right, that's going through. We're seeing the chat over there. A lot of the chat crown being passed around right now. I guess we'll go with chat monarch. Have more of a neutral term there. All right, let's do first things first here. At the end of this week's journey, we want to build the game for playtesting. And let me just say a few things here. We've got the Discord available, and it's rocking with questions on the weekend. That's great. But before anything goes to Discord, check notes. Again, my highly recommended approach to what we're doing here is not to work along with me the first time. It's to take notes. The notes form the mental model of knowledge, right? The class is not about clicking buttons. We do a lot of clicking buttons, but again, if you identify as a button clicker, that is not a really great future, I don't think. There's not going to be a lot of jobs for button clickers. There's going to be jobs for people who have a clear mental model of how things work, what to do next, how to ask the computer to do work for you. Because we're getting closer and closer to that future where you can just, hey, computer, perform said task, right? But why are you asking the computer to do this task? Is it the right task? Does this task actually result in the outcome that you intend? Computer doesn't really know any of those things. And so, yeah. Notes. And something else to keep in mind here. Would it be helpful to have timestamps on the lectures? This is not a loaded passive-aggressive question. I'm actually surveying you. Like, would that help as you go back through? Yeah, okay. All right, I've got a system that's almost ready to go for doing the timestamps where it feeds the transcript off to AI, and then the AI timestamps it and then post those all as the first YouTube comment. So I'll try to unveil that this week and see how it goes. So I'll work towards that, but be aware that there may be some bumps in the road here at the beginning of instituting this system. This is the kind of thing that all of these new tools should be really great for in terms of doing that kind of thing. I mean, I'm sure it seems like the kind of thing that YouTube is probably going to automatically do soon, I would think. But not yet. So that'll help. But yeah, please, by all means, Discord with each other on Discord. That's It's right there in the name. But, before, the Discord is not there just to answer questions that are clearly addressed in the lecture. Please take the time to check your notes. Please take the time to take notes. Please take the time to form a mental model, right? Even if you don't end up doing this, being able to, doing this meaning animation and interactivity design, being able to do this, organize information and reference it and build upon said information is going to be the name of the game. I don't know, like for every job, every possible task, like it's totally an applicable critical thinking skill. Okay, so we are going to build the game for play testing this week. And what does this mean? So a good metaphor here is that building the game is close to rendering an animation, okay? You can think of it as the same kind of thing. It takes place at the end of the process and results in a new type of format that is tuned for delivery and not for editing, right? Once you render the movie out of Blender or After Effects and you show people that movie or put the movie on the internet, the movie, you can't really like load the movie back into Blender or back into After Effects and edit it in the same way. I mean, you could hack a bunch of stuff, but it's not really the way it works. Because it's been, more or less drawn and printed into each frame. The critical difference here is that this is, the computer word here is that we are compiling software, right? And so this is a, I would say for the most part, more complicated process. It can be a more complex process than rendering. Rendering's not a walk in the park, but it's a clear loop of what's happening. We are evaluating everything we set up in order to draw a bunch of pixels on the screen in a frame and then organizing all of those frames to play back in some sort of frame rate when we render. Compiling software is a bigger can of worms here, right? Essentially, we're asking it to take the code and turn the code into a version that will run faster. And so this is something to keep in mind, is that the game will be more efficient when it is built. Once we turn it into a piece of software. What we're going to end up with here at the end of the day is that we're going to be doing an exe file, okay? Because we're going to be building a Windows game, because everyone is on Windows, right? I did a cursory check of this at the beginning. If I missed you and you're on Mac, send me an email, because we'll need to figure something out. Because in general, you can do it, but compiling Windows software on the Mac or Mac software from Windows is yet another layer of complexity on top of something that's already kind of complex. Good. Okay. And so at the end of this week's process will be, the usual, having the video presenting the stuff that we worked on this week and the improvements that you've made to the game, but then also building the game into an exe file. And then for this game, I think we're just going to share them amongst ourselves. And so we will post the game as a downloadable zip to Google Drive, your school Google Drive, and then we'll be able to share them there, okay? So let me just say it here. Do not upload game to Discord. I don't think it will let you, right? Like it'll say like, yeah, it'll definitely be too big. Because what is the limit?
10 megabytes.
Okay. Yeah, so it'll probably, it'll definitely just say, nah. Right, right. And you don't need Nitro, right? I'm going to put that in the syllabus next semester. Don't buy Nitro, okay? Like, I mean, I like Discord as a thing, but like that level of monetization is irritating as an educator. Yeah, so do not upload the game to Discord. And then we'll all be able to play test and give feedback for each other on the games, because it's one thing for you to play your game. It's quite another thing for someone else to play your game. And then, just run into all the problems that people run into here. You're like, inevitably, people do things, and you're like, oh, I never even thought someone would do that. And it turns out people will very quickly find out exactly what you didn't want them to do in the game. It's a really great way to test out the software. Right, the fun term for doing this now is dog fooding. Anyone heard that term? Like eating your own dog food? Just one of the other, terrible metaphors coming out of Silicon Valley right now. The assumption being that we've run out of food and now we have to eat dog food, and so we have to, test our own product. Strange times. Okay, so building the software. Let's see here. Let's do a test build. A couple of things. We'll say, take a note that the first build will take longer, okay? And don't worry. It's not going to take that long every time you build the game. The very first time, it's got to do a bunch of compilation, and then when you ask it to build again after you make changes, it pretty much just focuses on the new things that have changed, and so it's able to hold on to all the work it did previously for the most part. And so the builds after the first build are faster. So how long until you break glass in case of emergency, or quit Unity? I mean, I would say 20 minutes, right? I'm not saying everyone's build is going to take 20 minutes. Most of them are probably going to be much longer. But if you're on a computer that's just sort of skating by in terms of the hardware power, it could take a longer time to sort of get things rolling there. So the good news is that Unity gives you, like a progress bar or a series of progress bars that usually look like there's progress happening, so you can tell the computer is actively doing something and not just frozen. But it is possible for it to freeze when you build the game, so there's that. Also, the test build now. Okay, there's another situation to be aware of, is that you can get build errors. So you're running up against any errors, and some of you now are doing a pretty good job of making heads or tails of the errors that show up in the console. But it is possible to have errors that don't show up while you're working in the editor and are a result of running the build. And those can be more cryptic and difficult to parse, and I don't expect you to be able to do that. I would expect you to let me know, I tried to build the game and I got this build error, and then we can try to suss it out from there. But you want to do this, I would say before Wednesday, right? I'm not gonna ask you to turn in, but just run the build once, see if there's anything that comes up, and then you've run into that problem early and given yourself time to solve it. Because you can keep working. It's not going to be a hard stop, right? It's just that the build process will quit and you'll go back to the editor where you're able to work on editing. So keep that in mind. We'll do a test build right now of what I have in our example game. Anything else here? This principle, this is essentially, it's Monday, so my shortcut memory on Zoom is reinitiating. This is completing the workflow. So is my typing entirely. This is an important concept, especially when you start doing things like we're doing in this class, right? Where, this class, I said it before, is at what I would deem as the educational responsible technological threshold at which to teach a class, right? In terms of, things were any dicier, I don't know, is it really all that useful to present it in an educational context? But it does work most of the time, and it's fairly solid. But this is by far the most complex workflow that you'll probably have all semester, right? If you're taking photography class, we take pictures with the camera, put them in Photoshop or Lightroom, edit them, export them as JPEGs. It's not that there's not complexity there, it's that there's more complexity here. And so when you're doing things like this, especially at the threshold of your capabilities, I try to do this all the time now, is that whatever it is, someone asks me to take an augmented reality experience and convert it into a virtual reality experience. Like, I know enough to know that that's technically feasible, given such a certain set of parameters. But I also know enough to know that there's probably going to be a bunch of gotcha technology stuff in that workflow. And so I try to work in parallel. There's the actual creative work that's progressing, designing assets, considering how the structure of this is going to go, all that kind of thing. And then there's the technological workflow pipeline development that I'm doing at the same time. I'm not waiting until the design is done to do this stuff up here, because I know there could be some real tough problems to solve up here that will need time. And so I'm trying to go through a loose version of it that'll sort of prove that, given what I thought would be the pipeline, that actually works to get the whole way through the process, and then go back and re-update the pipeline with all of the finished design materials, because I've been trying to bounce back and forth and do those things in a parallel fashion. Yeah, I'm not saying that this is our version of doing that, because I've solved most of the problems here in terms of presenting how this is going to work, but because everyone has different computers and any other number of variables, you could hit some sort of wall here that we have not previously addressed, and that's why you should. This is your version of doing this test build early in the process, even when you're not done with the design, allows us to figure out if there's going to be some sort of technological issue, and then address that. And while you're working on the design. Okay, let's go back to Unity and look how this plays out. I organize the scene a little bit. I've got everything set up here. Let's save. Let's go up to right here. I can't zoom in here. Build profiles. And so I'll open up this window and you'll see this. Okay, so this is where we set up the build. Now, mine says Windows active, okay? If yours will have all of these things over here, right? And so this is the value proposition of Unity, that you can design an entire game or experience and then with minimal change publish to all of these platforms, right? That's why we use a game engine here, right? The incredibly brilliant people at Unity are doing the vast majority of the hard work to get all of this to happen, to have an editor where you can just edit and design once and then deploy in several different platforms. Now, you can take Unity and make a game that'll play on PlayStation 5, right? Can you tell it to output a PlayStation 5 and play it on your PlayStation 5? No, you can't. And that's not Unity's fault. It's Sony's fault, okay? You need to be an approved Sony developer, right? So some of these platforms, this is making it technologically possible, but then there's an administrative side of this that also needs to happen, right? So, for instance, I went through all of the trouble to do like an Apple app once, and then that got, it was a long and arduous process, and at the end, they still said, nah, because that's who they are. And so there's that part of it, but it's technically possible to spit this out from all of those. Windows is much more wide open, right? It's a computer. If you make an exe, sometimes Windows will warn you like, hey, I don't know what this is. You sure you want to run it? But you can say, yeah, and it'll run, right? And so Windows and Android are the most capable open places to put something, right? Hence all the games on Steam or in the Android App Store. And then you can also make something that would run on a website. There's more limitations there. We've done that in the past, but you do run into some other issues. Anyways, this is one of the reasons we use this. This is one of the reasons so many people use this tool, right? The Unreal Engine and Unity are by far the top two publicly available game engines to use, and for this reason. Okay, if yours doesn't say active here, that means that you need to download the additional parts that allow the Unity app, the Unity editor, to compile a Windows application. And so if I were to come over to Android, I'm not going to press this button, but right here, this button, switch platform, would essentially download all of the stuff that allows me to make an Android app, and then Android would say active, okay? And so if Windows doesn't say active on yours, right, you will have a different button here that says either, activate platform or switch platform or something like that. And you need to first, before you do anything else, press that button. It'll be a process. It'll probably open up Unity Hub and tell you to download some stuff, right? So if we look at Unity Hub, I think you can see this in Unity Hub. If you go to installs, yeah. And so here, I've downloaded Unity 6, and we're using Unity 6. And then I can make a Windows, a web, or an Android app. Like those deployment packages are already there. Okay. Yours may not have all of those, depending if you unchecked some boxes during the installation process. So it's important to realize that these are two separate sort of components, right? Think of this similar to the situation in Blender where we have EV and cycles, right? EV and cycles are built into Blender, but that's not always the case, even with 3D authoring programs. Like there's the program, and then you may need to download a separate render engine, right? And this is a similar architecture in this case. Okay, so mine says active. This is what we want to see before we do anything else. If yours doesn't look like this when you open up build profiles, then you may not pass. You can go no further. You need to get that to say active. It probably is there already. I'm just sort of trying to cover all of the possible problems. Okay, great. Next most important thing. Over here, the scene list. Your project, certainly at this point, has multiple scenes in it. You may have been saving multiple versions of scenes as you work through. And by default, when you build the game, it doesn't just build everything in the project, because a lot of times you'll bring in other packages that may have example scenes that are not going to be in the game. And so you want to be able to specify exactly what's going to be in the game. Because also you don't want the game to be unnecessarily large, right? You want it to ideally be as trim as possible and still maintain high quality. And so mine is set. When you look at wherever you're making your game, this is the name of the scene. You want to make sure that that is the scene that is here. If it's not, you can say open scene list. That allows you to edit this. And so can I delete it? Yeah. And then you could either say add open scene, or you can drag a scene in here, I believe. Yeah. Okay. And the order matters. Okay. In many games, separate scenes would be separate levels, right? And so you would want level 1 or the start screen. We're not going to have a start screen by next week, but you would want the start screen to be at the top, 0, right? Remember when we count in the computer, we always start at 0 instead of 1. And so you'd want that to be the top one. In our case, we're just going to have 1, right? So you just need to make sure that this matches this, right? So this is a common thing when students build a game, is that this, as for many reasons, defaulted to some other scene, and you go through the whole build process, and then you open it up and it's some demo from something else. It's not your game, and that's why. Now, back here, so that's there. Now, this is a little bit different in the new, here, player settings. Opens up a new window now, right? So I clicked here, it opened up the window on my other screen, and I just drug it over here. For you, it'll probably just open right there. Okay, so player settings. What are we looking at here? This is going to be some basic information about the game. You want to go ahead and change the company to your name, and product name to, Rolling Ball Adventure, so that when it makes the exe, right, whatever you want to name your game, it has this rather than whatever the default was. Default Unity Scene 1. You can create an icon if you want, and then down here there's 3 tabs. This is WebGL, this is Android, and this is Windows. We only care about this one right now. And so down here, this is some of the other settings. By default, we want to set it to full screen so that it plays in the full screen. Do we want to make any other changes here right now? I don't think we have to. Excuse me. I've even had 2 coffees. Let's leave that for now, because we should be able to run it full screen native. That all looks good. I've just changed this up here. And so we can close that out. And was the other thing I was thinking of there? We did that. We got everything there. We got that put together. That's good. Okay. All right. So now we have two options. These are the buttons that actually start the process. So there's build and run and build. And the first time I would recommend you press build. Okay. Later, once it builds the game, then you can press build and run, and it will go through the process and then automatically launch the exe for you. But for we have had instances where something worked here and not there. I have no idea why. So I'll press build, and it will prompt you as to where you want to put this. Now, big capital letters in your notes. Everyone pick up your pen. Do not build to the project folder. Do not build to the project folder. That'll break the project and the build won't work, right? And so what I usually do is I create a separate folder called builds, and then build to that folder, okay? So this is incredibly important, as opposed to everything else we do, where in order for it to work in Unity, it needs to be in the Unity project folder. This is not the case here. And so do not build to the project folder. And so I will go to the data folder here. I will make a new folder called builds 2025 fall. And we will build in there. And the build process has begun. And so it'll be a bunch of this here. The computer will be fairly snappy. We'll give it a few minutes here to see how it works. But it's going to be chugging through the process here. And like I said, this is, I think it's less cryptic than it used to be in terms of telling you what's happening here and indicating that something's happening. But it is possible to end up in some situations where you're like, is it doing anything? Like, it just seems to kind of just have stopped. In which case, you know, first thing, leave it alone and go get a snack or some coffee or whatever it is that you want. Let the computer work on it a little bit and then come back. But yeah, sometimes you'll get more or less descriptive, more or less interesting descriptions or accurate descriptions of what it's doing, running back end, right? Yeah, whatever that involves. And when we're done here, oh, cool. That was a little, I mean, it's pretty minimal. And it seems like as Unity has improved, we've gotten, it's been faster. Okay. And so now when you build it, you get a whole folder of stuff. And remember, I hit the button that just said build, not build and run. So it didn't launch my game. It just built the game. And this is not the game, even though it's an exe file. It should be fairly obvious. It says Unity Crash Handler, right? This is for if you run the game and then, yeah, anyways, that's not the game. This is the game, okay? It's the exe file here. And when we double click on the exe file, it should get our splash screen. And then there we go. We have full screen. You probably notice that the game seems smoother and faster. And yeah, this is the, with the settings as is, this will be a much more performant version of the game, right? Because it's just regardless of all the compiling and efficiency improvements that are happening when the game is compiled, right? I can't speak to this in great detail, but when you compile it, it's taking the things we've done, which are very high level. We're making decisions at a sort of design level of the experience. And even the C#, if you went in and wrote a bunch of C# yourself, that would still be a very high level. Below that, we have things like C, which C# compiles into. Below that, we have something called machine language. And then below that is just binary, like the lowest, most primordial communication language within the computer. And when you compile, it's taking some steps down this ladder, because when you do that, it makes the code more efficient, faster to run to varying degrees. There's a lot else to say about this that I'm frankly not qualified to say, but just know that this is kind of what's happening behind the scenes. So you're getting something that's much more performant. And then on another level, before you were asking the computer to, play the game and edit game, and now we are no longer doing that, right? So just at a very basic level, we were doing two things at the same time. Now we're doing just one. And so all of the resources that were allocated to allowing the game to be edited while also playing the game, those are no longer necessary, right? And so the computer can devote all of its resources to that. So both of those things result in some sort of improvement. Now, here's another super important thing, is that how do I get out of this thing, right? And so this is something we need to address right now, so that I just demonstrate this annoying reality, and then none of you ever have to deal with it again for the rest of your lives. So we need to Control-Alt-Escape out of this thing, and in Task Manager, we can delete it. So when you're looking at it in Task Manager, there we go. This is the Unity editor. This is your actual game, because I haven't closed the Unity editor. That's still running, in the background. And so here I'm just going to force quit the game and say end task. And now I can go back to Unity editor. But let's all vow to never do that by coming over here to over here, and there we go. A very simple script that we will now put in the game that you don't have to interact with it really at all. It just needs to be in your game. Escape to quit. And so that the escape key will be hard-coded to quitting the application, so that everyone can, especially when it comes time to play test, not have to Control-Alt-Delete out of everyone else's game. You can just press escape and quit the game and then launch someone else's game. And so we'll bring that in here. I'm going to bring it into scripts. Give it a second. And then I'm going to make a new game object and just call it escape to quit, and reset it and drag this on there. And there's nothing to do here, right? This just needs to be on an object in the game. Okay. And so now I can save. I can go back to my build profiles and go to build and run, and again redirect it to my builds folder. Once again, please do not build into the project folder. That's bad news. In fact, let's look at how one could possibly back up the project as a safety net here. So I'm going to just build to the same one here. I'm just going to overwrite the existing build, which especially at this stage is fine, because most of the time we don't want to keep the other builds. Anyway, later on you may want to have some sort of system for having multiple builds, but there we go. This time we see it automatically launch the game. Here we go, game is playable, and then if I press escape, boom, I'm out of there, right? See how much easier that was, right? Everybody feel that? You don't want to be the one that causes everyone to have to enter the task manager to quit your game, right? So we just need this in there. Escape to quit. All right, so there's this really mission critical situation where we do not want to build to the project folder. I'm going to map back up my Unity project. When you're working with Blender, we've talked about save incremental, or just in any program, save as, gives you a separate version of that file that if the file becomes corrected, you can go to and open that. But as we've discussed before, Unity projects are not a single file. It's an entire folder full of stuff that is all important, but not equally, not as easy to back up. So our strategy here is going to be zip the folder, right? This will create a duplicate and also save space and sort of freeze the project in time. And so that will allow you to, when should you do this? I would do this before you build for the first time, right? In case you do somehow have a lapse in attention and build to your project folder, that may not be an easy fix. I think if you just deleted everything out of there, you might be able to get back, but that's not always the case, okay? So zip the folder, duplicates, save space. Now, the issue here is that this will work, okay? So if you just want the easiest route that you don't care how long it will take to back it up, this is what you would do, okay? Now, the issue here is that the libraries folder is far and away the biggest part of the Unity project. If we were to look at the project here, if we look at the assets folder, if I right click and I say properties, and we look at this, it's like 200 megabytes. If I were to grab the library folder, not libraries, library, and look at the properties here, still going, it's 2 gigabytes of, right? So almost exactly an order of magnitude bigger. What is all this stuff? This is all data that's generated by Unity just to work, okay? But if it's missing, Unity auto-generates it, okay? So it makes opening your project quicker when all this stuff is there, and it's large And then also, in order to archive the project, there's nothing in here that has information directly about the construction of the project. It's more sort of like, I don't know, in between information. And if you were to look at it, it would be a lot of, inscrutable stuff. So this folder, the library folder, okay, pay attention here. This one can be deleted. And you can archive the project safely, and the project would be much smaller, right? And so, for the sake of time here, I'm going to make a duplicate and show you this. So if I were to Control-C, Control-V, all right, so it's copying my entire folder with the library, okay? And this, it's not going to take forever, but it's not fast either. And then if you had a bigger Unity project, it could be, much bigger than that, right? I've had ones where it was like 30, 40 gigabytes in the library folder, right? And this is stuff that makes the program run faster. It's not like it's like bloat or something like that. It's just, it's the thing you can do to really trim the project down in terms of taking that out of there. And so this is copying everything. And if we were to look at the whole folder, can I click out of here while that's doing its thing? Yeah, I think I can. If I can go back in here, and if I were to yeah, so the entire folder for the entire project is like 4 gigabytes. And so the library is eating up well over half of that amount of space. But you'd have to be very careful. Again, paying attention here, this only applies to the library folder. The assets folder is where all of your stuff is. I didn't want to run the risk of zipping up the project I currently have open so that doesn't, slow down class quite a bit. And this process is even slower because I'm copying from one section of a drive to another section on the same drive. If you're going between two different drives, this would be could be faster. And so now, if I wanted to speed up this process, I could delete the library folder. I could right click and say, trash that, and then zip it up. That would speed up everything quite a bit. It would take a little bit longer to open the project the next time that you unzipped it and opened it, but that would be one way to back it up. Zip up the entire project folder. Ideally, don't do that when it's open in Unity, right? Close it out, then zip it up. Just by making a zip, it will automatically, like making a zip duplicates it. Like the zip is a separate compressed file. And so that's the simplest answer, because now we are getting into some things where like you could permanently mess up your project. Good. Okay. We were able to make the game, build the game. We have a working build. We looked at some of the build issues, and let's look at the build that resulted again. So if I come back here and look at this, because we're going to need to zip again. If I go to builds, check it out. The exe, that is the thing you click on to launch the game. Do you think all of the game data is in here? No, right? That's 657 kilobytes. How many kilobytes in a megabyte? 1,000, right? And then how many megabytes is like a regular JPEG or just a typical JPEG? Like 1.5 maybe, right? For like something on the web. And so like clearly this is not the entire game. And so in order to share your game with everybody else, you're going to need to share game. Once it is built, you will zip the build folder and then post on the Google Drive. Alicia says her exe is kind of choppy. So when I finish this here, try sending it to me on email, Alicia, because I wanted to run it here to see if it's here on yours. Also, did you quit the editor before you launched it? Because that sometimes has an issue. Okay, so here we go. I'm going to share mine. I'm going to grab everything here. Shift, select, right click. Compress to zip, and it'll zip that up. Shouldn't take too long. I'll go to my Google Drive. I have a lot of stuff on there, but I'll make a new folder for it. Come back here. It should be done zipping by then. There we go. So here is the zip folder, right? And so the exe plus the data that's in that folder, or in this folder, I believe, 50 megabytes now, right? Which is, yeah, that's about where these should be, right? You can certainly have a much, much bigger Unity game, but we're not using a ton of textures and stuff in it right now. And so the zip file is what you can post on Google Drive. And yeah, that went up pretty quickly. Now, you are not done. You can click share, but no one will be able to play your game. You need to share, then go to anyone with link. This happens every semester. People click share, and then no one can get into their file because they leave it with the default restricted settings, okay? So you have to switch it to anyone with link so that the other people in the class are able to download your game. And then you can say copy link, and then this, the link, is what you would post on Discord. Not the zip file. It's still too big. This is what you would post on Discord so that we would all be able to play test each other's games. Build game, zip all the files in the build folder, then post to Google Drive, then share anyone with link. Okay, that's our process in order to make sure that, right, because next week, well, next week you'll be finishing the game and building it, but then the following week we'll be working on like a new thing, plus you'll be play testing all of the other rolling ball games that everyone posts and we'll have done by that point. Does that make sense? Right, and then the link goes on to Discord. And also, when should you build your game for the first time? Yeah. There's no better time than right now. Because you may run into an error and you want that to, you want to run into that error early so that we can figure out what exactly is the issue there. Okay, cool. We got that going. Please make sure that you have the escape to quit in there. That'll be essential for playtesting to make it easier for everybody to get in and out of your game. Oh, excuse me. Okay. So we're able to build, and you know, when we do future projects in Unity, that process is essentially the same. We're not going to have a lot of discernible changes to that. So, yeah. Okay, good. Let's take a look at a different mechanism here. Okay, so we're able to trigger stuff, and you know, we've done a lot of world building here in the game in terms of making it seem like a rich environment by having messages about what's going on or the story of the world for the player. But we want to be able to have some sort of goal-oriented process here for the game that is a level on top of our interactive, rich environment. And so we're going to be having objects that we can collect. And so this type of thing, we need to be able to acquire the object. We need to be able to track the number of objects that we've acquired, and then we need to know when we have enough. So this level of planning here, this is the first step for implementing any sort of game changes, game mechanics here at a very, very, very high level, right? We're even higher level than code here. We're just talking like what needs to happen? What is a series of things? Like regardless of how this is technically achieved, what is the train of thought? What is the process of events that needs to occur in order to have this happen? And so we need to have the ball be able to interact with something, right? Like know that it's hit something. Well, we know how to do that, right? We know how to trigger things based on their proximity to the ball. And so we kind of have the technology for that. We have our trigger zone that works. We have this and this are new wrinkles, right? We need to be able to count something, and we need to be able to know that when we've had enough. And the technical word I'll use here often throughout this discussion is a threshold. Threshold is going to be, a number usually, and once we surpass that number, it is meaningful in some way, right? We're gonna do it the same way that we've been doing it the entire time, is that we're gonna use some logic that sends a Unity event once we've crossed a threshold. And then we can do whatever we want, right? Once we have something into a Unity event, then we're good. So in the game here, we have Game Collection Manager. And so the Escape to Quit and the Collection Manager here are both more abstract game objects where there's no visual component to the Escape to Quit, right? It's just in the game. And so there'll be more things like this going forward, where this is where we store some of the logic and the functionality of the game, not a mesh, not a trigger, not a sound file, right? Nothing that's a piece of media. Rather, this is just some code that has some certain logic or connectivity in it and allows us to interface with other pieces of media. Good. So I've made that already, the collection manager, and I put the game collection manager script on there. And essentially, this is separate from the ball. It's separate from whatever we're collecting, okay? And so let's look here. This is separate from the ball, it's separate from the other things, and so we kind of talk to this, and this manages everything about our collection logic. So let's figure out how to increment the current value. And so we'll do this very simply here. I'll go ahead and make an object to use as a starting point. So let's use a capsule or something different. The capsule has a collider on it, and we need to be able to know when we make contact with this. And so we need our input trigger zone here. And as soon, I don't know if I can do that. I'll check to make sure. Because when you write a script, you can say this script requires a component. So even if the component isn't on the object, it'll automatically generate it come runtime. But I don't know if I could automatically check that box, because that's the thing that happens 99% of the time, is that you haven't checked the is trigger, even though trigger zone is on. And so I'm not 100% sure about that. I know you could require it, but I'm not sure you could require a specific state of it. Good. Okay. And so now we're going to build a whole sequence of things, right? We need to be able to touch this, essentially collect it. We need to tell the collection manager to count it, and that's several steps, right? And remember my advice here, avoid the big bang, right? And so what does this mean? Check each step as you complete it, so that you know that part works. Now I can build the next part on top of that next part, versus doing 9 steps, having it not work, and then not knowing which step doesn't work. So let's go ahead and do that. We are just going to have the capsule itself disappear. Right, so capsule, we will say game object set active off. And so when the, let's double check this, right? When the player makes contact with the capsule, we will turn the capsule off. And that's the first step in this chain of events that needs to happen. Success. But thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. That was amazing. Great. Okay, so this functionality is working. Something that came up over the weekend is that I've imagined you triggering most things with the ball, and this weekend some of you tried to trigger things not with the ball. And so the thing I've glossed over that needs to know here is that in order to trigger something here, the other object, in this case the ball, needs to have both a collider and a rigid body. Okay, the rigid body is kind of the thing that lets the, does the physics stuff plus lets it know. And so even though, if you want both things to run into each other, you guys know at this point now that both of the objects need both these things. But even to trigger, one of the objects needs a rigid body. And because most of the time we're triggering with the ball, it's already got a rigid body on it, or else all of our player control stuff wouldn't work. And so that's necessary. Yeah. Okay, so there's that. We've got that. Now we need to talk to the game, the collection manager. And so let's come back to the capsule here, and I'm going to expand this and drag the collection manager in. And then, obviously the scripts that I give you, I hand them off and I try to show you, especially now, like this function, this function, this function. But on your own, how would you figure out what's possible, right? You would load it into an event and then check out this menu, right? This would be the functions. I can't zoom in on this. I thought I used to be able to zoom in when I was on these menus, but I can't anymore. These would be the things that are the functions that are publicly available, okay? This is not everything the script can do, because there's this issue of public versus private functions in the script. In some case, you want to keep things private, not like for security reasons, just to make sure that it's better coding practice is, I guess, the simplest way to put it. Anyways, these are the things that are available. And so I used the mathy terms here, and so let's say what they are. Increment, count up, decrement, count down, okay? And so when you call the increment function, it essentially acquires that pickup. What type of data are we going to use to store? Let's review once again. Alec, give me one type of data. float. What's a float? Is it like a ship on the sea? Decimal number. Decimal number is the shortest answer, right? Logan, give me another type of number that's another type of data that's a number. Landon, sorry. Integer, right. What's an integer?
Basically like the points in the object.
It's one whole number, right? A whole number, right? So 0, 1, 2, right? 3.5, float or int? Float. 7, float or int? Int. 3.14, float or int? Float, right? Everybody see what I'm doing here, right? And then, Adrian, you have another type of data?
String.
String? What's a string?
It's basically like
Text,
text.
yeah. And then we've also had Booleans, right? Which are just going to be 0 or 1, true or false. In the interface, a Boolean is always a checkbox. It's either not checked or checked. And so which type of data are we going to use to store our number of collectibles that we've collected? Int, right. Because, I mean, you're going to model whatever it is that you're going to ask the player to collect in the game, right? Could be anything. Sticky notes, coins, pieces of food, whatever it is that works with your narrative of your game, right? But we're going to observe each of those collectibles as a single thing, right? This isn't sort of a more complex currency situation where we have dollars and nickels and dimes and pennies. Like, we're just going to have dollars, right? And so this is an int. And the function says as much, because you've come over here to collection manager, increment int, right? And so now you should be paying attention to the information in parentheses on the function, okay? So what does it mean? It means that this is going to require, and actually it's the incoming thing here is that it's the message that's getting sent is 1, right? And so it's going to count up by that number, that 1. If there's nothing in the parentheses, that means it's just kind of like a function that doesn't interact with data. It's just like the quit game function. It doesn't need a number to quit the game. It just runs the logic that quits the game, right? Anyways, so we want increment, and this is how much we're going to count up by, right? Increment by what? And everyone here probably 1, right? Unless you have, if you wanted to, you could do what I was talking about, where you have something that's worth 2 instead of 1. But for right now, let's keep it simple. Okay, and so now I've set these things up as the series of events that happens when I pick up the collectible. And Gavin, does this look okay or not? Bam!
Sure.
You should have known I was going to set you up. I'm that kind of teacher. What's wrong with this? Even due to the fact that you didn't hear the rest of the lecture because you weren't here, you should still be able to identify an error in this logic.
Do you have to check mark?
Okay, hold on. Let me give you the other piece of information. This is on an object called capsule. Now, you should be able to solve this riddle. Bum, 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 bum. You guys watch Jeopardy? We watch Jeopardy. What is happening first in this event? What's happening to the capsule? But what are we telling the capsule to do?
I should have listened to the lecture on the drive over here. I don't know.
We are set active. We're sending it what value? Is this a 0 or a
Oh, that's
1?
a 0.
That's a 0.
Okay.
So what happens when you send a set active a 0?
Nothing happens.
Well, we turn it off, right? Because it's 0, right? Because that's saying like we're either active or we're not, right? And then we send another message after that. That is the problem, right? Is that this will never execute because it's on the object that we've just turned off, right? And so, especially this is critical for making the collectible, is that you need to make sure that when you turn, in order to collect it, make it look like, you know, it's gone from the game, and so you have acquired it. We can reflect that in a user interface, and we'll do that here in a second. But in order to do that, you need to turn it off, and but you need to do that at the end of the sequence, right? And so almost every time, if you're set active 0 on the object, you know, if this equals this, right, meaning that you're talking to, the object is talking to itself, it's going to turn itself off, right? You almost always want to have that at the end of whatever sequence of events that you are triggering. Otherwise, the events that come after this are just simply not going to be triggered. I can't think of a sequence or an instance in which this would not be the case. So we'll first increment the count, then we'll turn this off. Okay, everybody ready? Are you ready? Boom. Boom. Okay. The first part worked, but we need to come over here to our collection manager and look at it. And does this mean anything to you? Why are you clapping? So you see, now it's happening so much now that sometimes I'm gonna start clapping to see if it's worth it, and then you need to determine like, wait, is this worth clapping for, or is he just fooling us, right? What Jack? What was the number before?
I think
It was 0. Yeah, yeah, and now it is 1, because we have acquired or counted our interaction with that capsule, right? And so this is Mario coin logic, right? Every time you make a contact with something, you have to keep track of that number. Let's do a more robust test. And so I've got this one, and I will Shift D this, or Control D. There we go. And hit play. And let's look. There we go. Check the collection manager. Don't clap yet. Good. And get the next one. 2, 3. It's working. Right? It's not working? Oh, no clap? I mean, I just tripled your investment, right? Like that's like, I'm the Warren Buffett of investing in these collectibles. God, I couldn't remember his first name. Awesome. Okay, so we're able to make this tiny number in the interface go up. Success. Let's do something more like, first of all, we know that that's working as the game editor, right? And that's the first part of it. But if you're going to ask the player to collect things in the game, you need to give them some feedback about where they are with this project, right? And so we need to now connect our mechanic. This is the case for most things, right? You need to connect the game mechanic to the user interface in some way so that the player can tell these things are happening, right? In Mario, you get your counter up there. It shows you how many coins you have. And we need to do that. And this, this has its own events, right? And so it's like a link in the chain of events here, right? Like the event is being sent from the trigger zone to the collection manager in order to keep track of this number. And then we have the threshold, right? And so, Amy, what is the threshold? What does that mean in this instance? Give us a guess. So here, this is going to be the number of things we need to get, right, in order to send this event. That's why this event is called on threshold reached, right? How many coins in Mario do you need to get an extra guy? 100. Yeah. You guys don't have that memorized? And so in Mario, the coin collector, Mario's not, you get the idea. This is 100, right? And after 100, logic is triggered that multiplies the number of lives that you have left there, right? When I refer to this, I'm usually in my mind referring to, original Super Mario Brothers, not the new Marios where you can just sort of like, just buy 100 extra guys if you feel like it, because you have a bunch of purple things. It's still, the coin thing is still in place, but there's all, like the secondary market currencies that allow you to buy extra guys. But have you guys played Mario Wonder?
Yeah.
It's outstanding. Super, super good. Okay, we are not going to set it to 100 for testing. We're going to set it to 3. Okay, so again, this will be part of the game. Maybe I'll have more later as I work on the design, but right now I'm working on some technical implementation. And so I'm trying to get the whole way through the workflow, right? Where I want to have the game acknowledge that I've hit the threshold and then change some things based on that. And so for right now, we need to set up something to test. And so I'm going to come over here to the canvas and make a temporary message by just making something, putting some text on screen. So I'll go to UI, text mesh pro, call this win, come over here and press F. Remember, this only works when I'm in the scene view here. And I usually do that so I can see what I'm doing. Put this over here. And certainly as a test for now, I'll switch this to you win. You should have a much more thought out message that connects to your narrative and to your scene, right? So some sort of personal congratulations from LeBron James might work for some of you. What would LeBron say? Let's go.
By the way, after this week, LeBron, it's over.
I don't.
I've spent too much time with LeBron.
I don't know if you're going to be able to get away from it. I think you may have created something that you've lost control of. Now, we don't want this to be here. You know, we don't want to just start the game and have it say, you win, right? So we're going to turn that off. And so over here in the collection manager, on threshold reached, we want to add an event here. And we want the win message, which I just drug in here, the one that I just put in the user interface. And we want to just simply turn that on. And so set active, yes, right? So that's turning something on. And so now, remember, Amy, when is this threshold gonna trigger? How many do we need to get? 3, exactly. When we hit the third one, we should see you win on screen. Yes.
I think Baldi's Basics has the same mechanic where you get 7 notebooks and they're like, you did it, now get out.
Yeah, I mean, this definitely like a fundamental game mechanic for sure. 1, 2, boom! Yay! All right, great. Let's check it online. I'm not getting applause emojis in the chat. Just saying. Or even like fun gifs, although I don't, let's not open that door, I guess. Cool. All right, does the chain of events there make sense, right? Every time we pick one of these up, it sends the event, calls a function on the collection manager that increments this int, okay? This current value here, this is a variable. If we were to look at the collection manager, there we go. Now we're getting some emojis in there. I'm even getting the party streamer, party hat, you know, emoji. There we go. And so this is the collection manager in C#. And so the current value is right here. This is a variable, right? And so the computer set aside a bit of memory in order to store this int. And when we call increment, it runs this function in that it, this code right here, this plus equals, this is a computer code way of just writing this. Current, we'll call current value just CV, just to keep this short. CV equals CV plus 1, right? And so every time you would run that, that's the way that you would count up in the computer, right? And so the first time you would run this, assuming CV equals 0 at the beginning, CV would equal 1. The second time you would run this, CV would equal 2, and it would just count up that way, right? But this is often abbreviated this way, CV plus equals 1. That's the same thing, right? So this is the more obvious, algebra way of writing the statement. This is the more code way of writing something with this plus equals. And you can use this to do multiplication or subtraction or division. You can do the same thing. Minus equals, times equals. I don't think I've ever used divided equals. Anyway, so that's what this is going. The amount is what's set in the incoming int there. Okay, and so that's what's going on behind the scenes. We got all that set up. The let's display the number. And so over here, again, in the user interface, let's go ahead and Text Mesh Pro this again, and this is going to be collectible display, and let's move this to a better part, perhaps up here. And I'm going to set this to 0 to start off. And how do we connect this? The collection manager has a slot here to speak to some GUI, right? And so this was, I set this up in the script so that this number would be easily displayed. And if we just connect it to a TextMesh Pro object, it'll automatically display this number and update it every time it changes. And so let's do that. I'm going to take the collection display and put it in there. And I don't believe I need to do anything else there. Let's test it. Boom, there we go. Right, so see how it went from 0 to 1? And so now we've completed the cycle. We've got a game mechanic, and we've got a way to communicate with the player about that game mechanic, right? We have this up here. Now, just having this number up here, right, we're all going to use this game mechanic in our game, but we want to design the games for a general audience, not just for other people in the class, right? And so they'll know what this is, but how would you communicate what this is to people who didn't know coming in? What's that? Yeah, a sprite, more text, right? Something like that to describe what's happening, right? And so let's see, what do we want to collect in this game? How about plants, right? And so let's properly design something like that. So I want a more casual font here. All right, let's check that out. So yeah, I'm going to collect plants here. And so with this in mind, I need to be able to access this both in Unity and I need to use it in Illustrator. And so you need to double click on the TTF and say install, and that will make it available. And let's create some UI for this in Illustrator. Okay, so we want to be working 4 screens here. So under more presets, we're not going to need something that's going to fill the entire screen, but there's a couple things to be clear of. Do we want CMYK or RGB? RGB, right? CMYK for printing only. We're going onto a screen. We want 72 PPI or DPI because again, we're going onto the screen. Let's make this in pixels, and yeah, this is going up in the corner there, right? So it doesn't need to fill the whole screen. It doesn't need to be 1920 by 1080. Let's, you know, do you need to nail this? No. If anything, you want it to be maybe a little bit bigger than necessary. Going the other direction, having it be really small and scaling it up is going to look cruddy, right? But going big and scaling it down is not, unless you're really, really big, it's probably not going to present a problem. And so let's say 100 pixels by 200. And yeah, so this is really important, right? Even if you're not going to use Illustrator, if you're going to use some other program, how to configure the document here to get rolling is really useful. We also, here's going to be plant label, and great. Come on, Illustrator, you can do it. You can create this blank 200 pixel artboard. This is like by far the least technologically challenging thing we've done all morning. I'm trying not to be a total Adobe hater here, but they're not making it easy.
You just asked it to make a file?
Yes. We have put nothing in said file yet.
Early.
The file doesn't even exist. Yeah, I guess. Did Illustrator not have its coffee? Oh my gosh, come on now. If the whole company was just like one guy working out of his garage, I would have a much more generous attitude about this kind of thing. I mean, seriously, it should be someone's job at Adobe. Like, what do you do at Adobe? I launch Illustrator all day, every day, under every possible conceivable circumstance to make sure it never crashes. Like, that Adobe can pay someone to do that.
They can,
Yeah.
but will they?
No, like they're clearly not. But I mean, I'm going back and forth with a lot of other faculty about this now. I mean, before, I think the monopoly was much more secure, but now, you know, the threshold to making new software is dropping every day, and someone's going to eat their lunch here. I mean, this is what's happening. Like at this point, I'll bet on Blender. Like, Blender will just like in 4.7 just add some sort of like vector editing workspace that'll be, you know, like, oh, it does like 99% of everything I need Illustrator for. Like, I'll just use that from now on. Like, someone is going to totally eat their lunch here. All right, let's try it again. I'm not sure if I have a second version of Illustrator on here I could open. Dear Lord. All right. Okay. And let's bring in, what was the name of that font? It was like New Wave with an N. There we go. And we get sarcastic clap emojis. It's the same emoji, but I can tell. All right, I think while cute, the exclamation point will be confusing for the player, so we'll do that. And so we have this set up. Let's give it something that works within our framework here, and build a little bit of user interface here. We want this to be transparent. There we go. Over here, get a little rounding. And we need to make sure that we got enough room for our number to be over here. So a big part of this, first of all, I thought it didn't let you do this anymore. It shouldn't. You should feel bad right now, right? What's happening right here, stretching, everybody writing this down in your notes, never stretch or squish typography, ever, right? The person who has designed the typography has gone through a lot to manage the proportions of said typography, and we don't want that to be disrupted. So when I'm making a decision here, I might want to actually put in a placeholder, knowing that I'm going to use the same font in Unity to check the spacing, right? I'm not going to keep this part here in the export. But just to sort of look at what this looks like, right? And so now I need to consider what's going on with the number of plants, right? The most important thing is like, am I going to collect more than 9 plants, right? Because then that puts me into the double digits, in which case the spacing and the amount of space I would need would change. And with this font in particular, maybe just looking at it and making sure none of the numbers are unreasonably large compared to some of the other numbers, right? The other integers. And so that gives me a pretty good look there. I may, here under the fill, having something in the background here, let's go back to layers and move this down. If you don't do this and you have a transparent background, you need to think about the fact that it's what we're seeing behind changes all the time, which may affect the readability of what you're trying to do there. So that's something to consider when building the user interface for what you need here. Okay, I've got this. What am I going to export this as? I'm going to export it as a PNG. So there is the export for screens. That should probably have most of the right things checked by default. Let's come over here And I can go into here, here, and I can save it right into that folder, my assets folder. This is artboard 1. And when you have export for screens on, yeah, PNG, everything's on there. Export. Let's look over here. Shouldn't even have to import it, because over here we should see it in the folder. Yeah, it made that folder there. I guess when you make a new folder outside of Unity in the assets folder, it doesn't see it. Because here it is. If we were to bring this in, let's relabel it to plant label. And we should be able to bring that into the canvas. So under canvas, I'm going to say new image. And then here under image, we should be able to bring in plant label under source image. Not working because we have to tell Unity how to address this image. Because you can use an image as a 3D texture, or you could use it as a sprite. And we are going to be using it as a sprite. And so we need to say apply. We've already done this before to make our sprite-based images. Now in the user interface, we should be able to bring that in here and here and it's still not liking it. Let's double check. 2D and UI. Did I apply this? There we go. There we go. So yeah, that didn't used to be the case. You've got to be able to set the anchor point first. I don't know if there's something strange in mind. Have you guys had to do that at home? Like you wouldn't use the image until you open the sprite editor and define the sprite. It used to define the sprite automatically. It used to define a sprite. Have you guys been doing that at home or no? No, like you would just bring it in and it would work?
I didn't actually use Sprite. I just did. I don't know. It might be different for people, but I just used like an invisible plane. Like I used a plane and had that as like the material for it.
Okay.
So I didn't actually try it. But
Do you remember doing this?
I have yet to use sprites.
Okay. Okay, and so now this is over here. Let's look in my editor. Our width and height. Putting in my pixel size over here, because by default it'll be square, and that will once again violate our rule of squishing the type, right? And so we've got that. Now we can locate this not up against the edge of the frame, right? This sort of tangential relationship between something and the edge of the frame is bad design. We don't want to do that in any class, in any instance of ever putting anything on a screen, right? We don't want to make it seem like it's like sitting on or running up against the edge of the screen. We want to have some sort of padding there from a design standpoint. Now the collection display, we need to change the font on this, so we need to take care of that. So let's go to font and grab our here and bring in our TTF. Right click and create Text Mesh Pro, font asset, bitmap. There we go. And now our collectible display, we should be able to put this in there. The color for the text, we can keep this consistent by sampling directly from our image. And then we want to okay, it's over there. That's not what we want. We need to be in front. I thought we had our layer thing over here. For sprites, we have our layers, but for here, first of all, we want this over on the other side, on this side of the box, so that when it expands this way. And so I'm going to say put that over there on that side, so that if you do, they're over and over here, and that's going to allow us to properly organize it next to what's happening there. This got cut off. The reason that got cut off was our sprite settings over here that I just kind of did willy-nilly. And so here, we need to make sure that we expand this box so that the entire, it doesn't cut anything off there. And you would need to apply that. And let me just check and see if anything has changed there. I don't think so. And so here, our render order in the canvas is going to matter. And so things are rendering, first to last. And so by putting the display over the image, and we'll call this, label the image, this is going to be the collectible label. I'm going to make this one a little bit more accurate. Collectible number, so it's a little bit clearer, right? If I move this up, see it goes away. If I move it down, there, right? Not as a child, just below. There you go. And then I can, scaling this is not the way to increase the font size. You want to increase the font size, right? And that's going to do it in a way that is actually increasing properly. Okay, and so now let's set up a collectible plant. I believe the collection manager sends a 0 when the game starts, so you can have your placeholder number in there, but let's just double check that. Yeah, okay, excellent. So we have something that looks okay, right? It's not default Unity text, right? So the first week when we learned about putting UI on screen, I didn't delve into the design part of it as much. You've all taken graphic design 1. It's time to bring those skills to bear in all of your other works. You haven't taken graphic design 1 yet? Okay. You're not taking it this semester?
No.
Okay.
It was never required.
Which program are you in?
Animation. I don't think I had to take that.
I'll double check.
The classes that were pretty similar to it, though.
Okay. Let's make sure that this is aligned. I might go back and move this down a little bit in the field, so that, especially if this is going to be a larger font there. If we're going to make it larger, perhaps a doubling there makes that work. But yeah, okay. Let's go there with that for now. We've got a label for this. And let's make a collectible plant. So we're going to come back here and select something. F, bring that back in, over here. And now use this plant. Cool. Okay, so let's make this thing collectible. Actually, before I delete this, this is like properly set up. So I can right click and say copy component, come over to my plant, prefab here, probably right click and say unpack. And then on the one with the mesh, well, they both have meshes here. I'll put it on the top level. I'm going to right click. If you right click up here anywhere, you can say paste component as new. There we go. That's in place. But we're going to need a collider, and I'm going to use the box for this. Okay, well, yeah, okay, so we're going to pick these up. They don't need to be knocked over, right? You may have other plants that get knocked over, but in which case you want to visually differentiate between them. And so this is going to be trigger, and this is on, it's still talking to that over there. You may want to come in and, you know, adjust the collider so that it's easy to make contact with in the game, like there. And this is going to be my collectible plant. There we go. And let's see, is there anything else here? We have a mesh, we have the trigger, that is checked. It's got the communication, everything else going with it there. That looks good. Let's test it. Good. I got the plant, but the script was still set to destroy the capsule, which is not what we want. We want it to be able to destroy the plant. And usually, you definitely want to reset these things afterwards. And sometimes it doesn't seem to work there. And so we don't need this or that. And here. Now if we hit this. We're able to collect the plants. We want to have a sound effect there. We want to have a particle effect there. All of those things going on. And let's go ahead and set this up as our collectible plant prefab. And make sure it works with the prefabs. And so the collectible plant comes in here. We're good, except that our other ones right. So a little bit of a limitation here. For the collectible, dragging it back in from over here isn't the best workflow because it doesn't because it's a game object and not a asset, it doesn't keep the reference to the collection manager. So in this instance, for the other prefabs, this is fine. But for the collectible, in order to just make it so you don't have to reconfigure this for each one, you just want to duplicate this, and then the duplicate should stay properly configured, but it still obeys prefab rules. If you were to change the underlying prefab, the other ones would change, but they would maintain their connection. So a little bit of a workaround there, but just to keep everything simpler. And so now, there we go. We get it properly grabbing all of the plants that we would want. Right, so just for the collectible, duplicate the game object prefab. Do not drag in from assets like the other prefabs. All right. Without changing a bunch of other stuff, it would not work. So this is bothering me a little bit here, this and this, now that we know we're going to have that be a different size. And so let's adjust that back here. About like that. And then maybe let's have a little bit of transparency there. So I might do it this way. So I'm going to make this one transparent and give myself a second one with no stroke. A little bit of gray, but then dialing down the opacity. This will give us more of a frosted glass kind of look. So now if we send that out again, so I was using the export for screens, export as, if you go to PNG and you set up the artboard correctly and you said use artboards, would be also workable, and it won't put it in that folder, right? This is, if you use export for screens, it creates this folder because You can export multiple images at the same time, but we're not interested in that. Plant label transparent, and export that. And you can see we're getting the transparency there, and okay. And back here, and I think this is just a Windows thing right now. I don't know why this stuff is not appearing in the folder. It appears over here, doesn't it? Yeah. Okay, I think this is just not working for me right this second for some reason. There it is. Again, we have to say sprite. We have to say sprite editor. Make sure you encompass the entire thing. And say save. And once again, can I drag this onto here? No, that puts it in weird 3D space. We want it in UI space. So better to create a new image, or we should just be able to sub this one out with here. There we go. Now I can properly format this. There we go. And I get that sort of frosted glass kind of look there. Right, so another way of addressing still being able to see through depending on the amount of space, but having something that works. I mean, still feels a little tall to me. Just being picky about these things is the key. Sprite. Our grabbing the sprite here. When I drew the box around it here, so this would be the proportions, 392 and 142. So, you know, either we put those numbers in or we just do this and expand it to the full area, in which case it's exactly the numbers that we were using before. So I'll just do that. That's probably the simpler workflow, and I can be more certain that I'm not getting any 400, 200. There we go. Now I know it's not messed up. And now over here, right? So again, I'm spending extra time being really discerning in these graphic design decisions, as should you, rather than just, quote unquote, throwing the type on the screen at the end of the process. We're taking the time to be very intentional about this. In fact, the color of this, I think, is not exactly what I want because of the layers. Let's see. Is this the... Yeah, I want this to actually be at the bottom. There we go. And so let's put this at file export as... And we'll put this in here. So making sure it fills the entire space. That way you know what the scaling values are. And now we should have achieved what we want. Much better. And that's properly formatted. So once you have this correct, then even if you come in here and do this, you're doing it proportionally, right? And again, going smaller is probably okay. Going too much bigger, and you can see that this clearly suffers at that point because that's how pixels work. And so now we can adjust our padding over here, right? With this, if we come out, if we're in the flat view over here, if it's orthographic, you can also make these adjustments over here and over here. And that feels better. A few rules to keep in mind. If we're putting type on screen, why is it there? Landon, if we put words on the screen, what are you going to do?
It will say basically when you interact with it, it'll
Less complicated. If you see something on the screen, what do you do personally as Landon?
read it.
Read it. Exactly. Thank you. Right? And so this is, a practically an instinctual reaction at this point for us, right? You see type, you see some, it's, I think, impossible for it to visually show something to someone who can read and have them like mentally decide not to read it, right? Like that's not a thing, right? And so every obstacle you put in the way of reading it is bad, okay? It's frustrating, really frustrating, right? Especially as someone who's like difficulty reading almost anything at this point, right? In terms of like just being able to see it. And so how can we make decisions that support this thesis? We can be more conservative with font selection. Okay, so this is a common problem with many students, is that when they get to Google Fonts, they're like, ooh, this is fun where I can pick something really out there as a design decision. And that is the wrong strategy to have as a, we'll say, early career designer, right? We've all spent in this room much more time as image makers than as font designers, right? We don't even have a class in font design for good reason. It's, it's kind of its own thing with its own set of skills. There are people doing it who are much better at it than you are. And you should trust them. And also, you shouldn't rely on the font to carry the design. It can support it, right? But having it be the thing that's drawing attention on the screen, especially in our case, where you want to be able to intentionally direct the attention of the player towards the collectibles, towards the interaction, towards the environment, right? If you have some sort of very obnoxious font that's always on screen distracting the player, that is working against what you're trying to do and what they're trying to do. So be more conservative. I wanted something, this is plants, it seemed more casual, and so something that looked handwritten-ish, but not scripty, right? So, I use that other script font as just sort of an example to differentiate between the two, but selecting a cursive font, right? Especially now, like how many of you write cursive? Oh, geez, that was a lower number than I was thinking. When you sign your name, right? Yeah, like it's not emphasized as much, right? And so, you would be making a very intentional decision there. A couple things to keep in mind, right? Just this is a very general, rule of thumb here. Older type things, like if you're making your environment look more antique-y, right? In that case, using something with serif. Alicia says she only reads cursive, refuses to read print. And newer, more modern aesthetic is sans serif. What's a serif? Little flags on the letters, right? We look over at Google Font. It's it's practically the primary way to organize type, and so it used to be right at the top. Before we had serif and sans serif, now we just have feelings. Okay, and so now you got to scroll down for that. Serif or sans serif, right? And so something like Fat Face, which is a fun name for a font, right? Old-timey. It's just generally an older style of font creation. There's still plenty of instances but so if you're doing something that's like a older design, usually something like this makes sense. Again, there's plenty of examples of this being subverted. I'm just trying to give you some basic guidance here, right? Whereas something that's sans serif typically looks more, is this like accumulating my filters? Looks more modern, okay? But regardless, yeah, the more the default is to, okay. Something that lightly supports your design decisions here, right? So does this go with it? Is it difficult to read, right? Is it so stylized that, you're gonna have a hard time deciphering it? This doesn't strike me as a great UI font, okay? I'm sure there's, when you get married, you can use this for your wedding invitation, but besides that, I'm not too sure. So consider that when you're putting these together here, okay? And our games are not huge, right? And so we should really be looking at a single font. And so whatever you do here in terms of this decision, unless you're doing something very specific where there's multiple voices in the other messaging to the player, like one of the, if this one should probably match this. If you have two, then I could understand the case for having them, one of them not match that. But, two different fonts max, okay? That's a hard wall for you, right? We don't want to have a different font every time something pops up here. Like, that strikes me as it would be tough to justify as a design decision. Cool. Make sense? Okay. Let's look a little bit more at what else we can do with our collectibles. Is that we want to have some sort of sound happen. Another issue with the sound that we went back and forth about on Discord is that what's a 2D sound? Give me an example of a 2D sound source in the game. Just one. Music. What? Music, right. The music, right? The music is not going to change volume the way we have things set up, right? There's examples of this, but like it's just sort of like it's a soundtrack that's playing the whole time, right? What would be an example, Jack, of a 3D sound? Yeah, the fridge, right? We don't want to hear, if your fridge is functioning correctly, you shouldn't hear it in the living room when it's running in the kitchen, right? Right? Is your fridge running? Why don't you go catch it? Yes. It's not really a joke you clap at, I guess. Like. It's one of the Bart Simpson jokes when he calls Mo. These are in-game. Remember, the fancy word here is diegetic sound effects, right? And so those are the two options for our sound sources. The thing that we kind of glossed over before is like the thing that lets you hear anything in the game is the audio listener component. And by default, just when you make a new scene in Unity, this is on the camera. Because that's the view from which we're looking at the game. Certainly if you're making like a first-person game, like that is certainly where you'd want to have the audio listener, right? Now, because of the way our game is set up, and some of you have the camera further from the ball than others, right? Depending on the different game design decisions that you've made, it may be a good idea to move this onto the ball, right? Because there may be an appreciable amount of distance where the ball would be within the zone of a 3D sound and the camera would not, right? Whereas with a 2D sound, this is irrelevant because, like, regardless of where the audio listener is, that sound goes to the audio listener. And so, you could notice that this component doesn't have any. There's nothing there, right? And so you could either remove it and then go to the player ball and have the audio listener on the ball, right? And so that would be how there's really like, well, how far can I listen? That's totally on how you set up the sources. The listener is just there. Like, it has to have a location in space, and that location in space is going to be coming from the ball at this point. Does that make sense? Okay, so I'm going to undo that for mine for right now. So that's just as it was. But that's an important issue to keep in mind. Additionally, Something else to use in your game design this week as a way to start the conversation about particle and VFX design a little bit more. The particle pack from Unity is a useful one here. So you may have to do, it may prompt you to do some upgrading. You have to go through the same process, right? Add that one to your assets, go to the package manager. You've done this a couple times now. Everyone's getting a feel for the package manager, I think. And then in here, particle pack, let me save. There should be a whole, hold on. Cool. Okay, let me do this full screen. Okay, so in the Unity Technologies, which is where you are accessing all of the furniture stuff, there should be another folder once you import it, and it'll say like, hey, you're going to need to update a couple things like render pipeline, something. Okay, I just did it and it ran fine. And then in the scenes, there's a scene here, and let's go to play maximized, and we can look at a lot of examples of the kind of things that particles can be used for, and we can use some of these as starting points for some of our own design here. And so there's a lot going on. Like, this is a really super cool example of what particles are capable of, and even though a lot of this looks super fancy, for the most part, it's fairly performant here, right? So again, when you think of particles and particle system, I usually encourage people to put the word elemental in their mind, right? So water, fire. Now, again, with great power comes great responsibility. This is not me giving you license to set your game on fire, literally, right? And now that I've said that, someone will certainly do that. But there's lots of different examples of different particle effects here. Now, some of them may be much easier to use than others, okay? Right? So my message to you is not, you may freely copy and paste from this into your scene and it will work great. That's not the case, right? Some of these will be much simpler than others. Some of them are multi-part, multi-step things, right? Right, like especially like rain here, it's like one particle coming in contact with something else and then spawning another particle, right? And so some of these may just be out of reach in terms of like simply implementing them, whereas others will be easier to use. Right, the waterfall here, right? In general, like, you know, all the water here is faked, right? In terms, like, there's not actual computer graphics water simulations happening. It's, you know, a way to sort of make an effective version of that while having other things happen, right? So, yeah, let's look around a little bit. And some of these are combinations things, right? Where it's particles plus this is a shader that's doing the disintegration part, right? And so you want to look up more of this stuff online. This is real-time VFX. In fact, there's a really, the place I go, first place I go if I ever have a question about this kind of thing. There's an amazing, super vibrant online forum called Real-Time VFX. I would bookmark that. This is super active for Unity and Unreal Engine and a bunch of other applications. A lot of like really amazing artists doing, really great stuff and talking about it and solving problems related to the game engines there. And so this is a really great, just sort of example in terms of like it's set up like a museum and you can sort of like wander around. This is a so different from our third-person ball controller, right? This has a very simple first-person capsule controller, which allows you to sort of move around the scene here and think about how some of these things may be useful, right? This is, again, a multi-part shattering thing. So here, up until now, we've been using particle billboards, right? Just an image, but you can also spawn full-on meshes as a particle. And that's some of what's happening here with this like earth bending effect. Let's see, we had that one glowing one over there. Yep, you guys are going to make me regret showing this to you, I bet. Yes.
Sorry for changing the topic, but a lot of those effects I'm seeing right here kind of remind me of Halo for some reason.
Sure. I mean, these are in certainly every AAA game has at least one person who's, like this is their job. They're the VFX artist for the game, right? So again, in the case of Halo, with the resources of Microsoft, right, there's like a team of really brilliant people working on this stuff, right? So this is a lot of, creating a lot of these things, the more complex ones, definitely leans into the technical artist category here. And let's see. Right now, let's see, looking around, something that may work as a starting point for sort of drawing attention to some of our plants, like as a pickup, right? And here we have some different, pretty much everything that's got its own zone here has its own prefab, right? And so, some sort of sparkly draw attention to this. Like this is perhaps more important than the other things. This might be one way to go about it. And so, and you can press space. Oh, this is really great. I haven't read through all of these. Right, so some really good information about what's going on here. And then also like dragging in the prefab and then sort of checking it out and trimming it down, could certainly help in a lot of instances. So let's look at this one as a possible starting point for that, okay? So it's the Firefly one, right? How do we get back to our scene? Back up here. Back here. And then back down to the particle pack. Okay, and again, the Unity particle pack, right? There's a bunch of other stuff you'll see on the asset store. Some of it may be free, but I can't speak to whether or not that's going to work in our setup of Unity. So there's a lot in this. Let's all use that. Effect examples, magic effects, prefabs. That's Earth Shatter, not that kind of magic. There we go. Let's bring this in. So here's I just searched for flies, and here's the fireflies. I can drag this in. And let's see if we can learn some more about particles by tuning this. And so, we want to use this to draw attention to this. The first thing I would do is unfold over here and sort of look at the structure of what's going on. And so there's actually two particle systems here, right? Because there's a hierarchy. And so we have something on top and something on bottom. And so the first thing I would do would be to turn off the bottom one and see what we're getting. What is different with the second one?
It's the lighting.
Yeah. Okay. So here, because this is, yeah, we can see that. So you see these lights that are appearing here on the bottom. This is another particle subcomponent that we have not turned on. Is that you can't have particles actually generate a light object, so that they even if they looked glowy, they would not be emitting light into the scene. You would need a light object to do that in given our render setup. But that can get real, as you imagine, right? Like calculating light, generating a bunch of lights, that can get expensive very quickly. And so they've separated that out into a second thing here. And so in this case, I want to be able to edit this one. And so the first thing I'm going to do is prefab, unpack completely so that I can freely edit this one. And then if things go horribly, I can just go back and grab the original prefab and start over because I'll have that there. And so, yeah, the lights are happening there. You'll see them happen on the ground. If I were to delete this sub one here, come back and grab the top one, you see the lights are gone. And so let's just leave those out of it for now. And the light subcomponent is not there. Cool. Okay, so how would I go about limiting the area of this? I would not, as a first thing, come up here and scale it. That's going to, essentially changing the whole thing, and that's not a great idea. Over here under our shape is sort of the area at which all of this works. And we have a hemisphere right now. We changed it to a box. We have that. It's still quite a bit beyond the box area. Changing it to shell makes that smaller, and then we have thickness, rotation. They're moving a lot of different directions. And so now, I mean, I've got this box. It doesn't quite constrain them to where I would want them, but let's see what's happening. The particle thing is large, and there'll be many components here, right? But by turning them on and off, you can sort of see what they're doing. So the ones not to turn off, the renderer, right? Because that just means it would stop drawing anything, right? So let's leave that as is. And so we have color by speed, and this is causing them to sort of change color as they're changing speed. Very minimal effect. Size over lifetime. If we unfold that, you can see that this causes them to essentially grow and then shrink at the end of their life. Noise. And so you see what a big effect noise is having, right? So noise is the thing that's kind of making them wave around, right? We turn that back on. You can see that that's doing a big deal. And so if we look at the noise, this is a big thing that's moving them around. So in terms of strength and frequency, if I were to just, again, in general, the more important things are at the top. Not always, but in general. If I were to grab the strength here and dial this down, I can sort of constrain some of this so it's in a smaller zone. And the frequency here being how fast they move around, the noise. So you can sort of experiment with some things there. Collision, whether or not they're colliding with the world there. In this case, this can be a lot to manage because there's different things to collide with. And so usually having particles kind of like moving in and out of things is not really a deal breaker artistically. And so it's, you can move that around. And then texture sheet animation is what's making it look like a firefly here, and to some degree changing some of this. And so that's there. And now, more importantly, what if we want them to be something else, more of like a magic thing and not this firefly material? That's in our renderer under material, right? And so this is the thing that's actually causing them to look like that. And if we wanted to have a different sort of effect, changing this out would be one of the first things. And so there'll be a lot more stuff here. There'll be things that are sprite sheets. This means they're animated. And then there'll be things that are just static things, right, like this. And those will be easier to manage right now. So what if it would look more like that? And the other thing with the fireflies is that it's put on a mesh. And I'm going to change that out from mesh to billboard. And render alignment, velocity, that's why they're changing the way they face. We could say view. Now they all face the way we would want. And then obviously the color. Color is pretty easy. Up here, the color is being randomly sampled from this gradient. And so this is something you can adjust. You can make your own new gradient preset, right? So if you press that button, it gives you another one. And so you can come in here and find a color scheme that supports your design, right? And so the top of the color node is the opacity and the bottom is the color. And so if you click on the top one, it's going to be a 0 to 255 alpha, right? And so if I put that there, that's essentially meaning that they're fading in this entire time. And so a fade in and a fade out looks like we want the colors just to be solid. We'll manage the opacity somewhere else because it's easier to conceptualize if you put it somewhere else versus here where you have to kind of like double set it. Right, and so now it's selecting between those things. And I have something that's like more magic sparkly, right? And I could come in here and adjust some of these things, right? Experiment with the material. And now, because you got the particle pack, there'll be a lot more options here. More of a bubbly kind of thing. So, a lot of options. The tail is exactly that. It's the trail. And so in the settings here, there's a trail. And if you were to turn that off, we would have just the particles moving around. Or you could turn that up, right? And so the trail lifetime should make it longer. And you see they start to trace, you know, their path in a much longer way there. But yeah, now I have something that could work. Again, the total amount, super important slider, the rate over time, right? And so this makes the effect way more dense, right? It's the noise that's giving us that fun motion right now, or way less dense, combined with the lifetime. Okay, so 20, this is in seconds. This is a long particle life, okay? And so that's why this number can be so low. It's only birthing 2 every second, but there still looks like there's a quote unquote, you know, like good amount of particles because they live for so long. And so it's always a balance of this number and this number here. And so if we made them shorter lived, just 5 seconds, but gave them much more dense, much more, you'd see they sort of cycle in and out more there. And the gradient, if it takes up more space, like essentially every time it births a particle, it randomly chooses a point along this gradient for the color. And so the bigger the visual space it takes up, the more, the higher the chance that the particle will have that color, right? And so if I were to do something like this, move this over here, you'll see that many more of them are yellow now than were before. So that works like that. So, the opportunity to learn some more about particles. You will for sure run up against some things you don't understand. Try to pare it down into the stuff that you can make heads or tails of, and not all of them are going to work, nor should we want to have, you know, most of us are not going in the direction of this being a game with a ton of explosions in it right now. Maybe one, but not just constant, unending, wanton chaos. But I might as well just be throwing down the gauntlet to create wanton chaos there. But, so this, how would I get this to interact with my plant? Make this a child of the plant here. Take the fireflies and reset. So it's actually over there by the plant. And so now my plant, again, it's not going to play in here unless I have the whole thing selected, but now my plant, is being drawn, there's attention being drawn to it here. I could, offset this so that they're not going through this floor so much. I could constrain their area some more with the box settings, like so. To try and really draw the player's attention to that, especially from this angle. Cool. All right. We'll pick up with that on Wednesday. But now we can build this whole collectible mechanic for our game. We'll also start to think about what works for your game. What do you want the player to seek out in the environment? And we can do some examples modeling wise, right? Think of things that you could put together with simple shapes, unless you've got a lot of Blender experience already, in which case have at it. But yeah, what would be something that would work with your aesthetic in your design of your game that would also be something that you could approach in Blender? Try and have an idea on Wednesday so that I can either help solve some issues there, fill in some Blender gaps, or say that's not a great idea, or that'll be super tough to model for X, Y, or Z reasons, and we can try and think of something else. Great, awesome. Talk to you then. Yes.